Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I was asked to introduce the next panel, which is going to be about indigenous people in the Arctic. I am Aimar Ventsel from the University of Tartu. I'm an anthropologist, and I will be also part of this panel. But I'm glad to introduce other people, and I'm very glad because at least 3 of them I know personally. So Indrek is going to be the first one, the guy who is a legendary linguist and my university mate. The next one will be Vladislava Vladimirova, who is now associate professor at the Uppsala University, and we used to do our PhD studies together. Next one is Liiva Nigas, visual anthropologist and researcher at the Department of Ethnology at the University of Tartu, also the guy I worked together and used to study together. Next one, Jean-Loup Rousselot, guest lecturer by the Estonian Academy of Arts. Then we have Thomas Barry, Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Akureyri. And then Riikka Karpinen, member of the board of the Arctic Society of Finland and the Regional Council of Lapland. So this will be the next panel. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Indrek, and I'm a field linguist. So what does it mean to be a field linguist by trade? I mostly work in North America with the speakers of Native American languages, severely endangered languages. That means that languages that have virtually no children left who speak them natively. But I also have a very active and keen interest in Siberian languages. Currently I am affiliated with Indiana University, but I get paid to work on 3 native languages which are spoken in North Dakota. Okay. So there are approximately 7,100 languages in the world, give or take. They are distributed very unevenly. 23 of these languages actually account for about half of the whole world's population, just 23 languages. And if we take 200 largest languages, then we actually get almost 90% of the whole world's population speak just 200 languages. So the average number of speakers that a language in the world has is approximately 10,000. So Estonian, by this standard, is a fairly large language. There are about 500 languages in the world that have 1 million or more speakers. Estonian has slightly less than 1 million. So, the United Nations, or UNESCO, has said that in order for a language to maintain a viable higher educational system, a language has to have at least 1 million speakers. So Estonian is just there. There are less than 100 languages in the world that support a fully fledged higher educational system. So 96% of the world's languages are only spoken by 4% of the whole global population. So what is going on right now in the world? We are witnessing a drastic reduction in the number of languages. Every year, about 5 or 6 languages become extinct, and the rate of extinction is accelerating. So right now there are approximately 600 languages that have less than 10 speakers left. Another 600 languages which are spoken only by adults and no children. And another 600 languages which are spoken only by the very, very elderly, people who are in their 70s and 80s. So if we add these 3 figures up, we get 1,800 languages approximately. So that's a huge proportion of 7,100 languages that are recognized in the world. So some people may ask, so what's the big deal? You know, languages have disappeared all the time. And new languages, you know, if we think about Latin and all the descendants that Latin has, what makes the current situation unusual is the rate of extinction, language disappearance. Like never, ever in the history have languages disappeared this fast. So 600 languages that have less than 10 speakers. The closest one to Estonia is right across the border between Estonia and St. Petersburg. Vote, or Votic language, has, as far as I know, only 2 people left. Then another language that is not spoken natively by any children is a good example is Seto. It's a Finno-Ugric language that straddles the border between Estonia and Russia. As of last year, there are no children under the age of 18 who speak it natively. Everybody's 18 years old or older. So even though we have 10,000 people still speaking it, there are no children. So give it another 70 years, this language is also going to be gone. So 1/3 of the world's languages is projected to disappear. Now you can put whatever you want there. Usually they say by the end of this century, probably even more. So in light of this crisis, UNESCO declared 2019 the International Year of Indigenous Languages. There was a lot of hullabaloo, you know, people were very enthusiastic. There were meetings in New York, everywhere else. Hundreds and hundreds of representatives of indigenous languages from all over the world got together. There was a lot of grandstanding speeches, but actually nothing came out of it. So UNESCO recognized it, and then they decided that 1 year clearly is not enough to save or salvage these languages. So now we are in the midst of an international decade of indigenous languages, which lasts from 2022 till 2032. It's called a decade, but it's actually 11 years, which is kind of bizarre. And we are talking about indigenous languages. So now, this is a really loaded term. For example, is Irish. We know that Irish Gaelic is disappearing. There are less, probably maybe about 10,000 people left who speak it natively as a first language. Is Irish indigenous? Is Breton indigenous in France? Is Scottish Gaelic indigenous? Manx? Is Estonian indigenous? Or Swedish? Or Norwegian? Well, with these languages that have their own titular states, like Estonia, Sweden, Norway, we really don't have much to worry about. So whether they're indigenous or not, because apparently nothing is really endangering these larger languages that have their own states. So who are the indigenous people and what are the indigenous languages? Again, there is really no good definition. Every country has their own definition. But there are 2 kind of frameworks that people follow. The first one is the International Labour Organization's Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention from 1989. The other one is United Nations Declaration on the Indigenous Peoples. And basically, these are peoples in independent countries who are regarded indigenous on account of the descent from the populations which inhabited the country or a geographical region to which the country belongs at the time of conquest or colonization or the establishment of present state boundaries, and who, irrespective of the legal status, retain some or all of their own social, economic, cultural, political institutions. So we all have a gut feeling who is indigenous. We all have a gut feeling, but there is really no good explanation. So the main criterion at this time, this day and age, seems to be political. So you have to have been colonized, you have to have become a minority in your own country, you have to have inhabited a certain area before another group moved in and started to dominate. So how many indigenous people are there in the world? The number that I see the most is 370 million. And United Nations came up with it about 20 years ago. I have no idea where this figure comes from. I've tried to track it down. You know, I've written to people. And it seems to be a circular thing, you know, everybody cites everybody else, but I haven't been able to get to the source of this figure. And some other people say 300 to 600 million people. So that really makes me ask, what about like the whole continent of Africa? Anything south of the Sahel, you know, the Arabs, they are obviously, these languages came later. Anything in the sub-Saharan Africa, you know, there are states, and are these people indigenous? They have their own countries? It's a really, really bizarre question. Some countries don't even recognize indigenous people, like China. China says that they are a unified country with diverse ethnic makeup, so all the people there are equal. So even if you speak a language that only has maybe 1,000 speakers in China, you're at the equal standing with the Han Chinese. So like these small minority groups, indigenous groups, and the Han Chinese, they created the state of China together. So some countries don't even recognize indigenous people in their own countries. Well, long introduction. So who are the Arctic and I would actually also say subarctic indigenous people? There are roughly about 13 or 14 language families. There are maybe 147, 150 language families in the whole world, like language families, Indo-European, Uralic, Estonian belongs to the Uralic language family. And then there are roughly 150 language isolates that don't have any relatives. So these are the major language families that are distributed in the Arctic and subarctic. Why do I also include subarctic? It's really, really difficult to separate the two. Let's say if we talk about a group like the Evenki, they live all the way from the coast of the Arctic Ocean down to China. So are they Arctic? Obviously, they have very different modes of living in China and in the Arctic. What about the Eskimo, who live in the very, very north, all the way down to the same latitude with, I'd say, Lithuania? What about the Aleutians, Aleutian Islands? Aleutian Islands lie between the northern latitude of 52 and 55. Tallinn is at 59. So they actually live south of Estonia. But traditionally, they also considered Arctic people. So who are the Arctic people, subarctic people? They are pretty much all the groups that inhabit Alaska, the northern territories of Canada, Greenland, of course, and all of Siberia and Russia west of the Ural Mountains. So in Russia, they are called the small numbered minority peoples of Siberia, the Far East, and the, what else? The North Siberia and the Far East. And there are, in Russia, there are officially 40 of them. Actually, there are more. Who and what is common to all these people, or most of these people, is that they are rapidly losing their languages also. So the language loss is accelerating. Like Yeniseian, this language family has only one language left. The other 4 or 5 are gone, and the last language, Ket, has only 200 speakers left. Okay, should we do something about it? I work with language reclamation, language revitalization, and it's an uphill battle. I think for every 100 immersion programs, maybe there is one that kind of is successful. So what should be done? I just cut to the chase now. I don't think we have time to go out and just start describing these languages. This is what linguists like to do. They like to describe languages, you know. They work 9 months of the year in universities. They like to pontificate on some minor, really obscure points in language grammar, while all these languages are disappearing. And then, at least in North America, then you have your 2 or 3 months in the summer, and you spend maybe a month doing field work, and that clearly is not enough. So by the time, you know, with this rate of documentation and description, all these languages will be gone before anything really can be done. So should we save these languages or document and describe them? I give you just an example here. You know, the giant panda in China, there are maybe 1,000, 2,000 animals right now alive. China and international organizations spend about $500 million a year on just preserving the panda. It seems to be so important. You know, the total amount of money that is spent on documenting languages in the field is probably less than $10 million a year, much less. So it's, you know, it's a fraction of what we spend on just one species. And there are so many reasons why we should preserve these languages. Language is not like material culture that you put in a museum. It's something probably physiological to us. And when we lose these languages, you know, every language affects the way, I wouldn't say how we think, but how we behave. Think about Chinese language, for example. Chinese has 4 tones. Poetry in Chinese is completely different from poetry in Estonian. We couldn't translate between the 2 languages. There are so many unique features that we don't even know what to do with them, why they could be important for us. So what we really should be doing right now is documenting. What does it mean? So a good description of the language is a corpus of texts. There's a lot of texts. You know, you just go out, you ask people to tell you stories. Maybe you go out and you eavesdrop when people are talking, and then you go home and transcribe and translate everything. So that's a corpus of texts. Then a field linguist will take these texts, try to figure out the rules, how the grammar works, and then writes a grammar. This is like, if you're a field linguist, that's your, like a passing exam that everybody will take you now seriously. And finally, you spend the rest of your life writing a dictionary, very solitary job. Can you think one person can really describe a language? No, it takes 100 people 100 years to describe a language. Unfortunately, current state of affairs is such that, at least in North America, there is pretty much a person or 2 people per language working on a language. What is really lacking is audiovisual documentation. So I would say that what we need to do now is just send out people, PhD students, to the field, give them video cameras, give them recorders, and just, you know, film audiovisual documentation and do as much as you can. And once these languages are gone, then we will have 1,000 years to do philology, figure out what's going on, you know, with these recordings. Translations, we can figure out the grammar and so on. And, you know, philology is a big thing. We're all interested in what the Romans spoke and Etruscans and so on. And we really don't know why it could be valuable and important for us. Well, actually, we have an inkling, but we don't have time to talk about it right now. It's kind of abstract. What's the state of documentation right now in the field? In the 1960s, in the United States, at any given moment, there were 40 or 50 PhD students working with the speakers of native language at any given moment. You know, they were on Indian reservations, they were in Canada, Alaska. Yeah, and it was cool. People really liked it. As of this year, in the United States, I know only 2 people who are actually spending a whole 12 months in the field documenting languages. And there are more than 100 languages left in the United States. Siberia, 60, Canada. Most of these languages disappearing. Some are okay, like Greenlandic is pretty okay. Greenlandic for about a decade now has been the sole official language in Greenland, which makes me also think, is Greenlandic indigenous, since they now pretty much got their own country and the language is official? Very political question. There seems to be a lot of racism also tied to this notion of indigenousness. I mean, do you have to look Caucasian? I mean, European? Do you have to look slightly non-European? So where's the boundaries of indigenousness? If you start going from Finland, Lapland, Estonia, eastwards, there's a chain of languages, like a continuance of languages. I would say it's a dialect chain, that on one end, 2 ends of this chain, people wouldn't understand each other. But if you go to the next village, and then the next village, you understand people, but less and less and less. If you go from Estonia through Ingria to Karelia, and then you start going to the east. And also people look different as you go eastwards. And at some point, people, you know, governments and international organizations have decided that these guys are not indigenous, but those guys there are. Another question, can a language be indigenous, but not the people? Good example in Estonia. Last year, Võru language speakers, another disappearing language in Estonia, only 17 families left where parents speak it with their children on a daily basis. They declared the language indigenous, but decided that, you know, they themselves are a sub-ethnos of Estonians. So what's the state of affairs in Russia? Pretty bad. There is a really, really good institute in St. Petersburg by the name of Herzen Pedagogical University that teaches 25 Northern Siberian languages. They do a lot of teaching and writing, which is great. It's really a very, very good place, but not enough documentation. The language research there is typically in the hands of the speakers of the language, usually elder academics, and there is very little, young people who are native speakers and taking over. Now the situation in Russia is such that the Estonian official policy is that no collaboration or cooperation with Russia. I think field linguistics should be a big exception here. For example, my colleague Linguist here is sitting on a treasure trove of video recordings. I think 15 hours of Edelman text speakers. He recorded them 15 years ago. I think there were maybe 15 speakers. Now they're down to just one speaker. So if we end till the end of the war, this is just going to be a material that is going to be a curiosity in museums, but not really practicable. So my message here is that, we need more field linguists. It's a very solitary job in a way, but extremely rewarding to me, at least, as a human being. I get to speak to new people every day. I've established very intimate, strong ties with the remaining speakers of many different languages. But it's not very rewarding academically, so to speak, because in the academia, publish or perish. If you don't publish, you're out. But basically, the stuff that I've collected, I have enough material, I myself have collected for at least 100 PhDs, seriously. And those people who get faculty jobs all over the world, what do? They work with the materials that the field linguists have collected. But, it's easier to, again, pontificate in the academic serenity of your study. So thinking just about these 1,800 languages that we saw here, 1,800 languages, 1,800 languages, that are in the immediate risk of disappearing, I think we need some kind of a framework, organization, or institution that funds research, just this documentation of these languages. We need a bunch of PhD students. I used to be a PhD student. PhD students wallow in inferiority, complex of inferiority. They go out and they slave away for very little money. They use the money to pay the language informants. So, and there are many such people in the world, but it's becoming every year harder and harder to get funding. So if we got, let's say, $20,000 per student per year, they can go out there and that will cover their living expenses, their travel, because usually these places are not very expensive where they have to go. That's only $40 million. I think the Panda takes $500 million a year. Yeah. And the International Decade of Indigenous Languages that UNESCO, that we are right now in the middle of, this is year 4, I think. Year 3. There is nothing like that. So somebody has to take the bull by the horns. And there are so many Arctic and polar scientists here. So your institutes, I encourage you all to establish a department for indigenous languages, Arctic languages. There are maybe only 100 Arctic languages, circumpolar languages, out of 7,100. So at least this one group, let's say in the tropics, let's leave them to other people. But this is really our responsibility. And that's it. If you have any questions, I understand we have no time. I'm minus 13. Minus 1.13, okay, that's not a grade. Yeah, thank you.